purchasing offers us two very similar sounding models to work with, the supplier positioning matrix and the supplier preferencing matrix. Pegasus Veterinary Hospital, the scenario, challenges us to recognize which of those two we actually need. Let's take a look. Pegasus Veterinary Hospital is a partnership of 5 veterinary surgeons who specialize in treating horses. Okay, they're located in a $25 million facility on 20 acres of land, employing over 40 full-time staff members. The business manager of PVH has conducted the following spend analysis. Spend analysis, the collecting, classifying, and reporting of expenditures. They have done a spend analysis, and what is it that they have provided us? Oh, the business manager recognizes 5 distinct categories. Notice that? 5 distinct categories of expense. Okay, let's take a look at some of them. Surgical supplies and pharmaceuticals, spend a lot of money. This is nice. Not simply the overall amount, but also the proportion is supplied here. So they spend over half their money just on this one category. Now, horse transportation services, much smaller number, much smaller percent. Okay, minor category. Commercial grade horse supplies, not including hay and grain, even smaller number, even smaller percent. Hay and grain is listed separately because, in contrast, they do spend a lot of money on that, almost a third of their money. And then veterinary grade horse supplies, including special feed and sterile bedding, and we're back to some fairly small numbers. So what the business manager has done is looked at all the various things that are purchased and grouped them into these 5 key categories. All right, now the information continues about those categories. PVH's approach to purchasing in each of these 5 categories has always been the same, but the business manager suspects that PVH could benefit from taking a more sophisticated approach, recognizing some key differences between the categories. As an example, now see, this is one of the categories. Surgical supplies and pharmaceuticals are critical to the care that PVH provides, and most of these items are highly specialized to the treatment of horses and not easily located on short notice. Now, in contrast, see, here's another category. Hay and grain can be purchased from a variety of vendors for immediate delivery. Veterinary grade horse supplies, so that is another category, are available from several national suppliers who offer overnight shipping, making this category purchasing only slightly less convenient than, here's another category, commercial grade horse supplies, which can be bought at any one of a dozen nearby farm or pet supply stores. Horse transportation services. To round it out, the 5th category. What about horse transportation services? Horse transportation services, is a surprisingly problematic category of expense, considering how little PVH spends in this category. Yeah, I'm just looking back here. That was actually the second one listed. That is a minor category of expenditure. Most PVH clients prefer to transport their horses to and from the PVH facility themselves to avoid the additional expense of being billed by PVH for transportation. Occasionally, however, a PVH client requests that PVH provide transportation as well as treatment for the horse, meaning that PVH must then hire transportation service. While PVH is not a frequent user of this service, it must be able to hire transportation for a sick or injured horse on very short notice. All right, so it's all about that other category. Now, we have this question here. Which category would PVH most likely consider core to its business and thus invest the most effort in securing a long-term supply partner? If they're not going to treat all these equal, which category there should they focus the most attention to, right, and attempt to build the strongest partnership? In order to answer that question, it's really an invitation to use the supplier positioning matrix. Supplier positioning matrix. If you have a scenario, a situation, in which the buyer is looking at their own expenditures, and they are looking for some insight into the nature of those categories relative to each other. That is the supplier positioning matrix. That's the use of the so-called supplier positioning matrix. All right, now what is the supplier positioning matrix? Well, it's essentially a 4-box model. Oh, I can draw that. A 4-box model, let me try to draw it carefully because we can actually use it for more than one question here. So I'll draw a great big 4-square map where the x-axis, so to speak, is annual expense. Remember, the buyer is looking at the buyer's own spending habits, and here we can position a category anything from the lowest to the highest in terms of the degree of expenditure, how much the buyer is actually spending each year or during the study period. Okay, now that's just like the x-axis, spending a little, spending some, spending a lot. What's the y-axis here? Supply vulnerability. How do you spell vulnerability? I forgot the L. V-U-L-N. Ability. Now, everything from high vulnerability is here. Careful on this matrix. And low is down at the bottom. Okay, so over in this corner, if you're going this way, it's low expense to high expense in this model. If you're going up and down, though, it's low to high. So high is up here in that same corner. Oh, no, wait, but what is supply vulnerability? Okay, supply vulnerability is any issue concerning obtaining a particular category of goods or services to be purchased. How could a category be vulnerable? Oh, well, symptoms of vulnerability. If this is in short supply, if it's not easy to get a hold of, if you can't get it on short notice, or it would be really bad to run out of it, or it would be really bad to not be able to get it quickly. These are all things that would make, we'd say, well, that means that you're fairly high risk, essentially, in terms of supply vulnerability. But if you can get this stuff, whatever stuff you're talking about, if you can get anywhere, I mean, just run to the supermarket and you could buy some if you had to. Plus, it's not too terribly important. I mean, it's just this one thing that we use, and if we run out, I mean, we can wait. Okay, that is all indicating something that's fairly low risk. All right, now, the question didn't ask about the supplier positioning matrix in general. The question asked, which category of expense would PVH consider core to its business, and it should concentrate the hardest on finding a partner. It would be the category of expense that when you map them out on this matrix falls in this particular sector. That sector is known as, and here I'll write this down, the strategic critical. But we still have to answer the question, figure out which of the 5 categories actually falls in that sector. All right, well, to do that, we need to categorize them. And what we might as well do, even if we find the answer to this first question, is let's just go ahead and categorize all 5 of them, because if you look, some of the other questions are basically asking follow-up about elsewhere on the model. All right, anyway, so we're going to take the 5 categories and we're going to use the supplier positioning matrix to categorize them in that sense. Now, I'm looking at surgical supplies and pharmaceuticals just because it's at the top of the list. This particular category of expense. First off, right, annual expense. Notice that this one at the top of the list, this is the category that PVH spends the most money on. That means that wherever we decide to place that, it's going to be over here on the right-hand side because it's going to be high expense. Now, there's this issue of supply vulnerability. What are we told by way of hints whether this is high risk or low risk? Go back to this discussion here. Surgical supplies and pharmaceuticals, that category, are critical to the care that they provide. Highly specialized. This is more kind of bad news when it comes to risk to the treatment of horses. And this is the big one, not easily located on short notice. So, they are critical to care, meaning you need to always have them, and yet if it looked like you were going to run out of something, this is bad news because you can't get them on short notice. This makes it high risk. Okay, this makes it high risk. That means that surgical supplies and pharmaceuticals are both over to the right and they're high up on the matrix. Well, actually we answered the first part or the first question here on our first try, because clearly that category at the top of the list happens to be, I'm just going to write in pharma, surgical supplies and pharmaceuticals. Clearly that category is in the strategic critical sector, which means that they should consider it core to their business, right, and consider securing a long-term partner for that particular category. All right, now we might as well keep going since we have drawn the matrix and figure out where the rest of their categories would land. Let's look at horse transportation services because it's next on the list. Horse transportation services. Okay, they don't spend a lot on that. So I know that we're going to locate it over here basically to the left. Okay, they don't spend a lot on that, but what did they say about horse transportation services? They saved the discussion till last, but they said a lot. They said horse transportation service, right, is actually at the top here, surprisingly problematic category considering, okay, hint about risk. Okay, because most people don't use it occasionally. That's why they don't spend that much money. They only do this occasionally. They have to hire transportation. They have to hire transportation for, and they're indicating this isn't easy to do, a sick or injured horse. And again, they need it, right? There's that hint. They need it on short, and when they need it, they need it. They need it on short notice, even though they only occasionally need it. This particular category, horse transportation, okay, belongs to the left here, but still is pretty high risk. That's what they said, surprisingly problematic, which means it belongs in this category. This category is known as strategic security. Okay, we'll just note for now, horse transportation lands there. This is the type of category where you also might want to consider cultivating a close partnership with somebody who can provide it. In this particular category, you might even consider paying them a premium. I mean, not trying to get them to bid down because you're not going to be spending a lot of money with them, but it's really important that they're there when you call. Okay, anyway, that lands it in this category. Now, next category on the list. Commercial grade horse supplies, not including hay and grain. What did they say about that? Commercial grade horse supplies, they actually talked about it in conjunction with veterinary grade horse supplies, which is at the bottom of the list, right? We were here in the middle. They talked about that in conjunction with this at the bottom, and they do look similar. Commercial grade, only 2%. It was the smallest spending category. Somewhat more on veterinary grade horse supplies, but not a whole lot more. I mean, we're still talking modest percents. That means that both of these, you could kind of think of them as siblings. They're going to wind up over here to the left also. Now, risk though. Is it going to be high on the matrix or low on the matrix? Veterinary grade horse supplies are available from, now notice this, several national suppliers. You have choice if you're the purchaser, who offer overnight shipping, right? Short lead time, making this category only slightly less convenient, meaning it's pretty convenient, but it's only slightly less convenient than commercial grade horse supplies, which can be bought, they're saying, at any one of a dozen stores nearby. If they needed something in that category, they could just give somebody some money and run to the store and get it. So these are all characteristics that are indicative of kind of lower risk in terms of vulnerability. Which means that they belong here. Both of them, they're kind of siblings. commercial. So I'm going to consolidate them. They're really two different categories, but just to write, I'm going to write commercial and vet grade horse supplies. Arguably, both of those categories are in or near this sector, which is known as tactical acquisition. Tactical acquisition means you don't spend a lot on it and it's not a lot of risk. So it's kind of like the sort of no sweat kind of category. Okay, fine. Now we're trying to categorize all five. And the only thing we have left, because we actually simultaneously did this one and this one, is hay and grain. Hay and grain, oh, wait a minute, we're back to spending a lot of money. Okay, that's a fair amount of money. It's nearly a third of the amount of money they spend overall. You're back to spending a lot of money, so you know that it's going to be over here to the right-hand side. But what do they say about risk? Hay and grain, in contrast, can be purchased from a variety of vendors for immediate delivery. That is indicative of very, very low risk, right? What they're saying is you can get a bunch of different places and they'll bring it immediately. Okay, so we're going to be over to the right, but we're going to be low on the matrix. So hay and grain is going to land in the lower right-hand corner. Hay and grain, that category. That category is known as tactical profit. Oh, all right. Now, we really answered this question right here, right? We found it right away. But we've gone ahead and we've categorized the other categories because some of this, if you look ahead at the other questions, is going to kind of prove useful. Because, let's see what they ask next. In which category, on this matrix, should PVH focus most strongly on competitive bidding and award its business based on lowest cost bids, viewing these purchases as tactical, okay, there's another hint, decisions only. All right, let's think about this first in terms of the matrix. I won't draw the labels, I'm just drawing like a little mini version of it, right? And let's think about this. They're asking competitive bidding. Well, you're not going to be really competitive at competitive bidding unless you're spending a lot, right? That's what makes somebody interested in offering you a discount, maybe to have your business, which means that it only really makes sense to focus on competitive bidding. If you're a big time spender, which means you'd have to be over to the right of the matrix, right? But, hint, tactical decision. Notice that the two category names began with tactical in the lower row. Down here, lower risk. If you're going to just put your business out to bid, that implies that you will be switching business if somebody else gives you a lower price. That means that this must not be a very high risk supply that you are sourcing. Which means that, right, this is a key characteristic of that. Now, this is called the tactical profit. Tactical profit sector, meaning it's lower risk, tactical decisions only. It's called tactical profit because since you're still a big spender, you could probably use these categories to your advantage through competitive bidding. Anyway, the question is asking which category should they conceivably do that. We had noticed that already. That's right here, hay and grain. They spend a lot of money on hay and grain. And there's a bunch of different suppliers of hay and grain, and any one of them can deliver immediately. This is a very good opportunity to have those suppliers bid against each other for that big chunk of business. Okay, last question. If petty cash were used, and we're not necessarily saying that that's always a good idea in any organization, but if petty cash were used in any of PVH's purchasing, it would be most appropriate in which category? Okay, petty cash is where you just issue somebody some small amount of money and tell them to run to the store. Okay, and just buy something because you need it just then, so you're not pricing it, you're not partnering with anybody to get this, you're just running out, grabbing some, coming back, turning in your receipts. Oh, okay, so that means this have to be lower risk too, right? Because you must not be doing, oh, it have to be lower risk. If you can't just run out to the store, it must be a lower risk item. And you can't keep doing this if you buy a lot of something, so it must be lower expenditure also. So it's going to be this category, which is known as tactical acquisition. If you're going to have a petty cash scheme, then this is actually the most appropriate category of spending for that mechanism. And what did we say actually in terms of PVH's categories who fell there? Oh, you remember? Now wait a minute. Commercial and veterinary grade horse supplies. The thing about veterinary grade horse supplies is that they ship overnight. The commercial grade horse supplies is the one that they mentioned that there are stores nearby. Commercial grade horse supplies. And since we're only going to recommend one category, also, even though those two are similar, first off, it only makes sense because these are the ones with stores nearby anyway that somebody could run out and purchase something. And this is, notice, this is the one category that is the absolute most minor in terms of expense. That is what would make it appropriate to treat that way.